George Washington's story begins under a wide Virginia sky, on a modest tobacco plantation along the gentle banks of the Potomac River. Born on February 22, 1732, he was the eldest son of Augustine and Mary Ball Washington. From the moment he took his first steps on that farm, the weight of responsibility seemed to rest upon his young shoulders. His father, a planter of middling means, expected him to learn the value of hard work. His mother, firm and loving, taught him the importance of honesty. Even as a boy, George showed a steady gaze and a quiet determination that hinted at the extraordinary path ahead. Yet life's early lessons would not come easily. When George was just 11 years old, his father died suddenly, leaving the family's finances stretched thin. The boy's half-brothers inherited most of the land, and George was left to find his own way. He watched his mother struggle to keep the home together. Each evening, he sat by the hearth, listening to her prayers and steeling himself against the fear that their farm might be lost. The loss of his father carved a deep ache in his heart, but also ignited a resolve. He would honor his father's memory by rising above hardship. By his teenage years, George turned his energy to books and charts. He dreamed of wide forests and winding paths beyond his family's fields. A surveyor's compass became his treasure. At 15, he walked the rolling hills of Virginia, mapping land that others overlooked. His careful measurements and neat records earned him respect among older surveyors. He labored in the sun, sleeves rolled, dust on his boots, yet his spirit soared at the sight of distant mountains and unexplored valleys. Here was a young man learning more than geography. He was learning patience, precision, and the quiet strength that comes from honest work. But the frontier was not a quiet place of discovery alone. Tensions simmered between rival powers. French, British, and Native American nations all claimed wild lands beyond the established settlements. In 1753, at age 21, George received a life-changing commission from the Virginia governor to deliver a message to the French, warning them to abandon forts built on territory claimed by Britain. He set out on snow-dusted paths, his only companions a small native guide and a few packs of provisions. For days, he endured freezing rain, swollen rivers, and the constant threat of attack. He pressed on, driven by duty and the hope of earning his place in the world. His mission achieved, George returned home a local hero. The young surveyor became a captain in the Virginia militia. But fame came with its own trials. In 1754, he led a small force toward Fort Duquesne. Surprised by French troops at a narrow stream, his men fell into disarray. George watched as friend after friend fell wounded or fled. Outnumbered and outgunned, he was forced to surrender at the hastily built Fort Necessity. Humiliation burned in his chest. He later described it as the darkest hour of his life. Yet even in defeat, he refused to give in. He treated his captors with dignity, and they, in turn, let him return home under parole. Back at Mount Vernon, his family's estate near the river, George faced fresh hardship. Disease swept through the nearby settlements. He lost friends to fever. He fended off creditors pressing upon his land. Yet each morning, he rose before dawn, walked among the fields, and vowed to keep fighting for a better future. He wrote letters filled with hope and plans to marry well and restore his fortunes. In 1759, he wed Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow whose gentle kindness soothed his weary soul. With her, George found a partner in life and leadership, a woman unafraid to speak her mind, whose loyalty never wavered. Despite his marriage's comfort, the French and Indian War raged on. George served again, this time with greater rank. He learned strategy from British officers and grit from frontier fighters. At Braddock's defeat near modern-day Pittsburgh, he organized the retreat, rallying shaken troops with firm commands. When General Braddock fell, George stood between chaos and order. He loaded muskets for the men, tended to the wounded, and guided the survivors back across the wilderness. It was here that whispers of the brave Virginian first spread through the colonies. Yet George never boasted. He thanked his men and credited Providence for their lives. Peace finally came in 1763, but the young Virginia gentleman found himself at a crossroads. The war had stained the Ohio River with blood, and the British Crown now imposed new taxes on the colonies to pay its debts. George watched as old friends argued passionately in taverns and meeting halls about no taxation without representation. At first, he sought moderation, a gentle plea to the king. But as laws tightened, he saw the rights he and his countrymen held dear slip away. He wrote pamphlets advocating for fair treatment and joined the Virginia House of Burgesses, speaking in measured tones against arbitrary rule. Through the 1760s and early 1770s, George's reputation grew. He presided over the Virginia Convention and served on committees. Still, he longed for action. When shots rang out at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, the dream of a peaceful solution shattered. The colonial militias rallied around him, and the Second Continental Congress appointed him commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. At 50, he packed his saddle, kissed Martha goodbye, and rode north to Boston, where a ragged army awaited under muddy tents. The winter at Cambridge was cold, but Washington stood as a pillar of calm. He marched among the frost-bitten soldiers, offering kind words and sharing the few blankets he owned. He refused extra rations for himself, insisting that the men eat first. When some officers plotted to replace him, he faced their complaints with gentle firmness, reminding them of their oaths and the cause they served. He knew that unity was more precious than victory, and he treated both with care. In the spring of 1776, George crossed the icy Delaware River on Christmas night. His plan was daring, to surprise the Hessian garrison at Trenton. The soldiers trusted him, following him through sleet and darkness. At dawn, they charged, and the stunned enemy surrendered almost without a fight. That victory sparked hope across the colonies. People said the army had the heart of a lion, but Washington did not glory in his triumph. He praised his men, wrote letters crediting every company, and used the moment to recruit more soldiers. Yet the war's path was never smooth. Defeats at Brandywine and Germantown tested him. Supplies ran low. Some troops' enlistments expired, and they slipped away to their farms. In the freezing winter of 1777-78, the army took refuge at Valley Forge. Tents slept on frozen ground. Blankets were thin, and shoes fell apart. Disease claimed more soldiers than battle. Many nights George lay awake, torchlight flickering on his maps, wondering if the cause was lost. Still, he rode through the camp, sharing his meager rations, encouraging officers, and reminding each man why they fought, for liberty, for their homes, for a nation yet unborn. When the French formally allied with America in 1778, the balance shifted. Washington worked with French generals, learning new tactics and coordinating joint operations. At Yorktown in 1781, he trapped Cornwallis's British army on the Virginia Peninsula. Cannons roared and the earth shook. After weeks of siege, the redcoats marched out, colors lowered. It was the end of major fighting. Washington's name was spoken with reverence in London as well as Philadelphia. Returning to Mount Vernon in 1783, he laid down his sword before Congress in a moment no modern commander would dare repeat. He declared his service complete and asked only to return home. His selfless action amazed leaders around the world. Kings and commoners alike saw in him a leader unlike any before, one who served the people rather than ruling them. But the nation he left was fragile. Early state governments clashed, trade faltered, and paper money collapsed in value. In 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia to craft a new constitution. Reluctant at first, Washington accepted the call to preside over the convention. His calm presence guided debates through fierce storms of disagreement. When it ended, the document required a leader's steady hand to bring it into life. Elected unanimously, George Washington took the oath of office as the first President of the United States on April 30th, 1789. He stood on the balcony of Federal Hall in New York City, then the capital, gazing over a city of wood and brick. He wore simple clothes, yet every eye was on him. In his inaugural address, he spoke of humility and duty, refusing to echo the pomp of European courts. He set precedents that still stand: a cabinet of advisors, a respectful transfer of power, and a 2-term limit. Throughout his 8 years in office, he navigated storms of politics. He faced challenges: British soldiers lingering on the frontier, pirates preying on merchant ships, and fierce debates over banking and taxes. He consulted his cabinet, men of opposing views, and weighed every decision with care. He warned against the dangers of foreign alliances and the passion of party politics. Above all, he sought unity. As his second term neared its end in 1796, Washington surprised the nation again. He declined to seek a third term. In his farewell address, he advised citizens to cherish the Constitution, to avoid the lure of sectional conflict, and to trust in the enduring power of good government. When he departed the capital, he left behind a stable nation and a living example of leadership worthy of imitation. Back at Mount Vernon, George and Martha tended their gardens, walked the river's edge, and received visitors who came to pay their respects. He wrote letters to old comrades, offering advice on farming and politics alike. He watched the sun set over the Potomac, reflecting on a life that had carried him from boyhood loss to the pinnacle of leadership. Yet he never forgot his roots: the small plantation where he learned to survey the land, the harsh winters that tested his will, and the battlefield defeats that taught him humility. On December 14, 1799, George Washington died peacefully, surrounded by family. News of his passing spread like a wave across the young country. Churches tolled their bells, flags flew at half-mast, and strangers paused in the street to mourn a man they had never met. In the days that followed, crowds gathered at his tomb, laying wreaths of pine and laurel. They spoke of him as father of his country, a man of courage, honor, and selfless service. Today, his image graces coins and banknotes. Statues stand where children play beneath his watchful gaze, and schools teach his story to eager young minds. But beyond monuments and history books, George Washington lives on in the ideals he embodied: resilience in the face of loss, honesty that did not bend to power, and leadership guided by selflessness. From a humble Virginia farm boy to the commander of armies and the first president of a free nation, his journey shines as a beacon. In every generation, Americans look to his life and remember that even the tallest oak began as a single seed in the earth, nurtured by hope, rooted in strength, and reaching always for the sky.